Hello and welcome to Maggie Mumbles. My name is Maggie and on this channel I mumble about the things that interest me. Today I'm going to be mumbling about the Witching challenge that I did in 2019, 2018, 2017? 2017 I think, so almost 5 years ago. I had previously thought that I had lost all the videos, but I just found them. So now I'm going to actually get to react to myself, as you saw in the previous 2 videos. I thought those were the only ones that I had because they're actually on my YouTube channel currently, but then I found them in another file that I hadn't thought to look before. We are going to watch myself from 5 years ago, and I'm going to tell you how my beliefs have changed since then. If that sounds interesting to you, please make sure that you like this video and that you subscribe to my channel and hit the bell for notifications. Do all those YouTube-y things, as Emily D. Baker would say. It really does support the channel's growth when you do these things, and you know what? It's free and super easy to do, so I really appreciate it if you do those 3 actions. And while you're here, please engage with me in the comments. I would love to continue the conversation down below because, you know, my opinion is not the end-all be-all. Obviously, I'm reflecting on my previous beliefs and the things that I presented to the world, and I would love to hear what you think about what I said back then and also what I'm saying right now so that we can continue this conversation. So stretch your little typey fingers and please leave me comments when you feel called to do so. So without further ado, I'm going to play the next video. Yes, this is the 13 signs you're a witch, and I talked about it in terms of a tipping point, so when you actually decided to call yourself a witch, and then I talked about some things that a lot of witches have in common. And so we'll see what I say, we'll talk about it here, and let's get going. Hello! Welcome to day 4 of the challenge, the Witching challenge. Today's lesson, today's theme is the tipping point. So the moment or the event or the observation you had or the realization that you had that led you to start learning about witchcraft and to ultimately start practicing witchcraft. So I remember at this point in my video creation, I was trying to talk less quickly, and maybe I really need to do that again because I think I talk really fast. And so listening to myself right now, I haven't really said anything, but it is so slow. So I'm sorry if you're one of those people who prefer like quick speakers. Feel free to turn up the playback speed. Obviously I'm talking a lot faster than that, so it might make it kind of funny, but anyway, this is so slow. Maybe I'm just tired because I've done like 4 days of videos at this point, live videos, which is very tiresome for somebody who's an introvert. Maybe that's part of the thing. So I'm gonna ask a few questions at the very end of this video, but right now I'm gonna give you 13 signs that you might be a witch or that you're on the right path. Before we get into these signs, I did want to mention that I don't think that there actually are signs that will tell you if you're a witch. Most witches actually just decide to call themselves witches, and it's not really something that you're born with. It's not something that can be indicated with a sign. I talked about that in the previous video, I think, or maybe 2 back, about the misconceptions and the myths surrounding witchcraft, that there's no such thing as a witch's gene or a bloodline of witches, which, by the way, is a little bit, I talked about it being like related to Harry Potter and the pureblood, using that analogy, but it's also a little bit, it just feels a little gross, the idea of a perfect human or something like that, having witchcraft tied to a bloodline. So I've already talked about that. So I think it's really important to mention that here at the beginning, that this is just meant to be kind of fun, things that a lot of witches have in common. It's not like really something that indicates whether or not you're a witch. It's just like, these are things that witches tend to like. Really, the only sign that you are a witch is that you study and or practice witchcraft. So, and that you want to call yourself a witch. Like, that's really the only sign that you need. So just keep that in mind, that this is supposed to be fun, a little bit like lighthearted signs, and some things that a lot of witches just tend to have in common. The sign number 1 that you might be a witch, the earth. A witch is of the earth. So if you find the answers to your questions and your answers about life through the patterns of Mother Nature, then you might be a witch. If her wisdom is your wisdom, then you might be a witch. And if your life
and your behavior and your body and you in general are aligned with her seasons, then you might be a witch.
A lot of witches do practice earth-based spirituality. I think this came up in a previous video where I was trying to think of people who might not be connected to the earth patterns like nature and the seasons and still call themselves a witch. And I'm sure there are people, but it seems like that's a very common practice with witchcraft, is following the seasons, being observant of the natural world, enjoying spending time in nature, whether that's, you know, hiking or swimming in the ocean or going to parks or going into the forest or having picnics, just all these things where you're connected to the seasonal patterns, the changes in the natural world, all of that. I feel like that's a really common denominator with witches. If you don't connect with the earth and you're a witch, then let me know in the comments, because like I said, I can't think of somebody that I follow or that I know of who would say that, but it would be really interesting to know if there are witches out there that don't really follow the patterns of nature or, you know, the seasonal cycles and changes like that. For me, this is one of the things that connected me to witchcraft at the very beginning. So it's a very important part of my witchcraft practice, which is why I included it on this like signs that you're a witch video. I've told this story a lot, but I broke my back when I was 26, and it was like right when I was first learning about what witchcraft is. I knew about witchcraft because my mom was into goddess worship when I was a kid. My sister was really into astrology, and so she kind of was connecting in with that branch of witchcraft when she was a teenager. I started practicing tarot around the time when I was a teenager. I was really interested in herbalism when I was in college. And so all of that, I was aware of witchcraft, but I never really related to that word until I was out of college, right when I had moved to Portland. So the story that I tell a lot is that I had broken my back and I spent a lot of time, you know, laying flat. I was able to move. I had to move really carefully so I didn't like wiggle too much because I didn't have a back brace or anything like that, but it wasn't such a bad break that I couldn't move around. And so I very carefully would carry my yoga mat and my laptop and a pile of books out to the front yard where I used to live in Portland and set up in the sun and just lay down and read or listen to music or listen to podcasts or listen to audiobooks or just sitting. And one thing I observed was the way that the tree that cast shade in our yard changed, because this was in April, and so it was right at the beginning. I broke my back at the very beginning of April, and then by the time I was not doing this anymore, I think it was maybe, yeah, it was like right before my birthday that I went back to work, so I didn't do this every day, which is such a real, that's like a crazy fast recovery time, but I was very fortunate that I could take time off work and have people take care of me and not worry about that. Anyway, I just remember observing the tree in our front yard and how it changed in that time period over the course of basically the spring season in Portland. I saw the little buds, I saw the little flowers, the flowers fell and then the leaves emerged, and then I didn't really have sun anymore because I was shaded by the leaves. You know, every fall the leaves fall off the trees and then they grow back in the spring. That was a really meaningful experience for me, connecting with that cycle in nature, at least that portion of the cycle. And after that, I made a practice of always going outside throughout the year and observing at the same spot, at that same spot in the front yard, spending time observing how the tree had changed. Obviously, I wasn't able to do it every day when I was healed and I didn't have that injury anymore. But I made a point to do that at each of the sabbats. If you follow the wheel of the year, 8 times a year at least, I wanted to make sure that I observed the tree and how it had changed throughout the year. And I still do that. Now I live in a different place. I live in Florida, but I still have a very specific spot that I like to go to throughout the year and just observe how things are changing around me in the earth cycle. So that was a very long way of saying that earth-based spirituality is very important to my witchcraft practice, and I teach it in most of my books and courses and things because I think that it is important to a lot of other people as well. Anyway, let's see what I say is the next sign you're a witch.
Sign number 2 that you might be a witch. A witch is also of the moon, just as they are of the earth. So the moon is important in a spiritual way, and maybe you're not fully sure why, but if she takes your breath away when you see her, if you see the full moon or you see even just the crescent moon peeking out from the clouds and you can't help but look at her, then you might be a witch. If you're drawn to and pulled to the moon's energy, then you might be a witch. If you've gazed at her and you feel flooded when you see her energy, if you've spoken to her, even since you were a kid, then you might be a witch. Or even if you have just found this connection to the moon, then you might be a witch. If you're aligned with her phases in one way or another, maybe it's in the more traditional way to be aligned with the phases, or maybe it's in your own unique way, but in some way you're aligned with the waning and the waxing of the moon, then you might be a witch.
I'm enjoying the Jeff Foxworthy style of, you might be a redneck.
You might be a redneck.
But I'm doing it with, you might be a witch. So I'm enjoying that structure of this video. I don't consider the moon be a she anymore. I don't think the moon needs to be gendered. And so I have stopped using that language. I don't judge other people who see the moon that way. I just personally don't use the she, her language anymore when referring to the moon. Additionally, again, this is supposed to be fun, so if you don't like the moon and you're a witch, then that's fine. You don't need to. For me, the moon is also a very important part of my practice. With the seasonal cycle, that's obviously the solar cycle. The moon is obviously the lunar cycle, and those two cycles help me so much with timing, with goal setting, and the way that I view them differently because they're very similar. The moon is obviously on a much shorter time frame from the new moon back to the new moon than from, say, like Yule back to Yule. That's a whole year versus a month.
It's time for English lessons with Maggie!
Fun fact, did you know that the root of the word month is the root of the word moon? That's where the word comes from, is the moon, because a month is about the length of a lunar cycle. Fun fact.
And that was English lessons with Maggie.
At this time, I did value the solar and the lunar cycle, and I thought about the solar cycle as the masculine energy and the lunar cycle as the feminine energy, but I also don't use that language anymore because, again, there's the unnecessary gendering of things. I do believe in those two energies, the masculine and the feminine, but I don't call them that because there is too much of a connection to the gender. And I don't think that everything that is encompassed in what other people might call the feminine energy or the masculine energy is only associated with that gender. So what I call those things instead, because these dual energies, they do exist, or at least I work with them and I think of them, is projective energy and receptive energy. So outgoing versus ingoing. Also active versus passive, so making things happen, taking action, versus taking a step back and letting things happen to and around you. And then I think another way to think about these two dual energies is the knowledge that the moon is reflecting the sun's light. The moon is reflective energy, where I don't know exactly what the proper word would be, but it's like spontaneous, or doing things without thought. It's like leaping into action. So it's still that active idea, like pushing forward or doing things without reflecting. And then the moon is reflecting that sunlight. So it's just, there's a little bit of time it takes for the light to get to the moon, and then the moon thinks about it. That's kind of the idea of these two energies for me. So when I work with the solar energy, I think about it in terms of my goals that I want for my external life, things that are outside of me, that other people can see of me, writing my book or doing this YouTube channel or the podcast that I do with my sister, the goals that I have in my life. And then for personal goals, like the house that I want to live in, or remodeling I want to do in our bathroom, or the goals that I have for my relationship with my husband, all of those kinds of things are things I work with the solar energy for, based on the strength of the sun. It's strongest at Letha, the summer solstice, and based on whether the sun is getting stronger or getting weaker. All of that is useful for me when I'm working with those external goals. For the moon, it's still goals, but they're more of internal goals. So it's a lot of my shadow work and my emotional processing and helping myself understand my emotions, which is something that I've been working with a lot. And so all of these internal things, getting to know myself and all of that, those are things I do when I'm working with the lunar energy during the lunar cycle, which is much shorter. That's kind of how I would shift these first two signs you're a witch, is focusing specifically on how those energies are helpful for a witch and how I view them.
Sign number 3 that you're a witch. Wisdom. You are a sponge for knowledge. You are always reading and learning and wanting to discover new things all the time. Maybe you are equally awed by the simplicity of the universe as you are by the complexity and these things happening at the same time. If so, then you might be a witch. Maybe you find yourself bubbling with this information like a hot cauldron because you feel excited by this ancient natural healing wisdom that you're discovering. If so, then you might be a witch. And people may even be drawn to your wisdom because they can feel how wise you are. Then you might be a witch.
I like the imagery of the bubbling cauldron of ancient wisdom. I feel like this one puts witches on a pedestal a little bit too much. I do think that a lot of things that witches have in common is like this desire to learn everything. I don't think this is something that's just specific to witches. I often equate witchcraft as being sort of like a hobby. For a lot of people, it's a lot deeper than that because it is a spiritual practice. I think of it as a spiritual practice as well. So it's deeper than some of my other hobbies like crocheting. I think of witchcraft, my witchcraft practice, as a much more meaningful thing than my crocheting practice. But also sometimes I put witchcraft into my crocheting practice. So crocheting becomes a meaningful thing as well. With witchcraft being a hobby, if it's something that you're really, really interested in, then obviously you're going to be really excited about learning more things that are aligned with witchcraft. But if your interests are something else, you'll probably still be really excited about learning everything you can about those things. So I don't know if this is something that's really specific to witchcraft. And maybe I'm thinking about this in terms of like a neurodiverse person because there's this thing called hyperfocusing. And I'm not sure if neurotypical people have that same hyperfocusing on something where you like stay up all night reading about things, or you read something all day, or you watch videos all day and you forget to like eat or go to the bathroom. Because that's what hyperfocus feels like. So maybe, because I've said this before, at this time I didn't really know that I had ADHD. I didn't know any of that. I didn't even know that that was a possibility for me. So I think a lot of the things that I came up with and wrote about had that in it without realizing that that might not be a common thing for everybody. For people who might be neurotypical, who might not have the same like hyperfocusing experience. I just want to make sure that we remember that witches are just regular people who have an interest in this practice of using magic and incorporating like herbs and things to communicate with the spirit realm. So it's just like a specific interest, and I don't want to put witches on a pedestal as being like wiser than everybody else who is not a witch, because lots of people have wisdom for other things, even if they're not a witch. But at the same time, I do think that, like I said in this video that we're watching, witches do tend to be really interested in the universe and trying to understand it. And while that might not be unique to witches, I do think that that is a common interest. And so in that way, it could be a sign that witchcraft is a good path to follow for somebody.
Sign number 4 that you're a witch is nature. So if nature feels natural to you, then you might be a witch. If when you are in nature, in the woods, near the ocean, or other body of water, when you're in your garden, or maybe even just a park, if you don't live near a wild area, but a park is just as natural. When you are in these places, do you feel like you belong? And if so, then you might be a witch. If nature restores you in a big way, if it makes you feel connected to your environment, just through connecting with the grass or with the trees or with the ocean or other form of water, other body of water, or rocks or anything in the natural world, if you feel as if nature restores you, then you might be a witch. If you live by the woods or by the wilderness, or in a coastal area near the ocean, then you might be a witch. Or if you long to live in a natural area, then you might be a witch. Witches are intricately entwined with nature because we embody the powers of Mother Earth herself. So it's only natural that we would want to be close to this natural beauty and power, to be as close to it as possible. So if you do your rituals and your spell work by the waters or in the woods, or maybe you visualize yourself doing these things in the natural areas, or maybe you just bring the natural world into your spell work through the use of herbs and crystals and other natural objects. And if you do, then you might be a witch.
So this one kind of goes with the previous one with the earth. I think the first one was more about the solar cycle and the changing seasons, and this one's more about the natural world. Again, I think all humans are intricately connected to nature because we come from nature. So I don't think this is specific to witches, but I do think that there are people who are more interested in the natural world than others, and those people are more likely to want to practice witchcraft. And I think that's what I was getting at with this sign you're a witch. I'm probably going to say it like a million times, but like witches are not special or unique creatures. We're just regular people who use tools and materials to connect with a spiritual realm in order to focus on what we want out of life and direct our energy towards creating that reality. I also believe that any human can be a witch and can choose that for themselves. Since all humans are connected to nature and all humans can be witches, then yeah, this would be a sign that you're a witch. If nature feels natural to you, which is also, I had a comment on this blog post when I wrote about it. Somebody they were just like scoffing at the idea of signs that you're a witch. And that's part of why I wanted to really clarify that anybody can be a witch. There's not really signs that you're a witch, because of like several people who were scoffing at this post and were kind of offended by it. So again, it's supposed to be fun. But one of them really scoffed at this line that nature feels natural because the word nature is within the word natural. So it is kind of a funny thing to say.
The fifth sign that you might be a witch is animals. So if you are drawn to animals and they are drawn to you, then you might be a witch. If you have a natural rapport with the creatures of the earth, if you feel as if you can communicate them, even on an energetic level, then you might be a witch. And it's not just domestic animals either. Maybe it's the wild ones too. If animals are naturally attracted to you and they love you and you love them just as much, you might even cry or feel empathetically what animals on this planet feel, then you might be a witch. And if you know their symbolism on an instinctive level, if you naturally understand the meaning behind their appearance, the meaning behind their visits, or at the very least that there is a meaning behind their visit, then you might be a witch. Because witches and animals are aligned in the same way that witches and the natural world are aligned. We speak a similar energetic language and we recognize each other. So if you feel connected to animals, then you might be a witch.
To reiterate, witches are not like special, unique creatures. We are just humans who, like I said, practice witchcraft. So I think that's important, that there's not like a special connection between witches and animals. But I think, again, with this sign that you're a witch, the knowledge that animals have different meanings and that you can kind of uncover the meaning of their message by observing their behavior. So if you are connected with nature and if you are observing the animals that interact with you and how they're behaving, and you can kind of interpret that meaning, then that's kind of a witchy thing to do. And I think a lot of witches share this experience of, noticing either a change or an unusual number of like a bird or an insect or something in your vicinity, or maybe you're seeing the same type of animal everywhere, like on TV shows or in a logo, or the actual animal appears to you. If that's happening and you're kind of connected to that, being more connected to your intuition about what that might mean is also kind of witchy. So I'll say it again, it may not be a sign that you are a witch, but it is a sign that you might enjoy practicing witchcraft. I think that's a better way to say it. That these aren't signs that you are a witch, these are signs that you might enjoy witchcraft, and that you could call yourself a witch and you would fit right in with a bunch of other people who also tend to have these same interests and experiences. Hi there, Editing Maggie here to clip up this video into 2 parts. I hope you've enjoyed learning about these first 5 tipping points or signs that you might enjoy practicing witchcraft, because you might have these things in common with other witches who practice witchcraft. The remaining 7, I believe, or 8, there's 8 left, will be in part 2, so stay tuned tuned for that. It should be out tomorrow. So thank you so much for watching. Thanks for coming on this journey with me and revisiting my beliefs and how things have changed. I hope that it has been inspiring you to look at the things that you believe in and determine whether you want to continue holding on to those beliefs, if they're helping you or hurting you. If it is, please make sure that you like this video, that you subscribe so that you can continue on with the In Witching Challenge, and I will see you in the next one.